we're just taking care of a few last-minute details there. We're happy to have our panel tonight as we learn about seasonal activities for the native garden. And I'm especially excited because we have our own Wild Ones members presenting, and you can hear a little bit about their expertise. Plus, we have one of our suppliers here of native plants from AB Hatchery, Bill Inc. So I think we're just lucky all the way around tonight. So we're going to go through the seasons. We're going to start with fall. Amy Woodrum is going to talk about fall garden cleanup and related activities. Sherrie Snyder is going to talk about seed starting in winter. Not yet. Okay, and Sherrie Glowinski has started a native garden at her home. She started that last spring, so we're letting her talk about spring and tell us how that's progressed. And then finally, Bill is going to talk to us about summer pollinator plants. So we've got a full program here tonight, and we're excited for you to hear about each one of these. And the way we're going to do it, we're going to let each one speak about 15 minutes. And then at the end, we're going to sit up here. They'll sit up here at the table. And if you have questions for them, we'll have a question and answer period. Okay, we'll start with Amy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out this evening. Let me see if this works. Yeah, it does. Okay. So as Kathy said, I'm going to be speaking about activities that you can do in the fall in your native garden. Those activities are preserve, edit, and gather. So what does this picture, what slogan comes to mind when you see this picture? What do conservationists tell us we should do with our leaves? Yeah, and why? You know why? Well, there's several reasons. For one, it saves refuse going to the landfill. It also saves energy because you're not. Well, it saves pollution because you're not burning them. And then if you use them for mulch, you're saving energy because you're not going out and buying something that you could get for free. So to start. The most important reason why you want to leave your leaves is that a lot of insects overwinter in leaves. 94% of all moths overwinter in leaves. This is the cocoon of the Luna moth. You can see it's made its cocoon inside, and it's inside that leaf, and it's wrapped up. So if you're getting rid of your leaves, you're throwing this guy out. It'd be a shame to throw this creature out. Here's the Luna moth from another view. Another moth that overwinters in leaves is the Isabella tiger moth. You know that one as the woolly bear caterpillar. Everybody's familiar with that one. And that one overwinters in leaf litter too. Another benefit to keeping your leaves is that, as I mentioned earlier, they're free fertilizer. If you can use them in place of wood mulch to mulch in your flower beds to keep weeds out. And if you choose to do that, keep in mind you want to leave some areas open so that our ground nesting bees have a place to make their nests. Because over 70% of our native bees are ground nesting bees, and they need bare earth to make their nests. You can leave. Sorry, that's the wrong one. Oh, I forgot. In addition to the moths, there are some butterfly species that overwinter in leaves. This is a white-banded hair streak. This butterfly exists in our area, and so does the. Whoops, one wrong way. This is a great spangled literary, and that one also overwinters in leaves. So we don't want to throw him away either. While it is true that a thick layer of leaves can smother turf grass, if you leave just a thin layer of leaves, those will actually decompose and act as fertilizer in your lawn instead of buying fertilizer if that's something that you would normally do. Another reason to leave your leaves is that they provide an environment for insects to overwinter in that are food sources for birds like this brown thrasher. Um, that's always a sign of spring to me when I look out in the yard and see a brown thrasher flipping through the leaves looking for bugs. Another species that hunts in the leaf litter is our Big Dipper lightning bug. That's the one that you commonly see around here. It spends its life as a larva in the leaf litter, um, and those insects in there are its food supply. Um, our numbers of fireflies are decreasing just like most other insect populations are. So it's really important to provide a place where they can um, complete their life cycle. Related to leaving your leaves, you should also save your stems. Um, the first reason you should save your stems is that a lot of insects lay their eggs in hollow or pithy stems, and then the larvae hatch and complete their life cycle in those stems. This is a small carpenter bee. It's one of the bee species that uses hollow stems to reproduce. Other species of bees that reproduce in stems are yellow-faced bees and small leafcutter bees. In addition to bees, there's also some species of moths, spiders, and wasps that use stems to reproduce. In addition to that, um, some insects overwinter on the outside of stems. This is the chrysalis of a great swallowtail. So if you got rid of that stem, you'd be getting rid of this guy. They typically make their chrysalises within a meter of the ground. So if you're getting rid of your old plant material, you have a good chance of getting rid of some of your swallowtails. And it's a shame to do that after you've spent the growing season trying to attract them. At this point, I'd like to stop and mention soft landings. That's a concept being popularized by Heather Holm. And some of you probably know who she is. She's spoken to our group at least once, I think twice. She's a biologist and a conservationist, a pollinator conservationist. A soft landing is a planting of native plants underneath a keystone species of tree. And by keystone species, those are species of trees that support the highest number of insects. In our area, that would be oaks, willows, cherries, poplars. I think there's one more on there, and I've forgotten it, but I've given you a handout that says what it is. And then the second activity you can do in your fall garden is to edit it, which is maybe another word for weeding. Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry. My writing's too small. I've forgotten this. This is another reason to save your stems. These are goldfinches eating the seeds of coneflowers. So if you've got coneflowers in your yard, you've probably been treated to that scene in your yard as well. Okay. If you don't like the look of your stems in the garden, you can remove them and pile them elsewhere. This is my garden. I take tomato cages and put them in the back of the garden and then stuff all the stems in there so that you can't see them. Okay, now on to editing. This again is my garden. This plant right here is Canada goldenrod. I didn't plant that there. It showed up 2 years ago. When it first showed up, I wasn't sure which type of goldenrod it was, so I left it. And over 2 years, you can see it's gone all the way towards the back of the garden. It's spread about 12 feet in 2 years, so this fall I'm going to get rid of that. Another species you might want to edit out is cup plants. Marcia's in the back. I'm laughing because she gave me the cup plants. Cup plants, she told me there's a saying, friends don't give friends cup plants, but I don't agree with that. It does readily self-seed. And some people do cut the tops off of cup plants before it goes to seed to stop it from spreading so quickly. But I don't do that because mine is full of goldfinches and pine siskins, and I'd rather dig up the volunteers than get rid of the seeds. The final activity you can do in the fall is to gather seeds. There's several species of plants that you can gather the seeds from in the fall. Um, that is Monarda. That one you can gather in the fall. That's rattlesnake master. It's ready to harvest in the fall. Other species that are ready are all the asters and goldenrods, ironweed, wild quinine. Those are just some of the ones that you can harvest in the fall. In general, seeds are ready to harvest 4 to 6 weeks after they've bloomed, but there are exceptions. This is a seed pod of a southern blue flag iris that's growing in my garden. It bloomed at the end of May, beginning of June, and just this past week, the pods have really dried and started to split open. So I collected those. When you collect seeds, before you put them into storage, you want to make sure that they're dry. If you put them into storage before they're dry, you run the risk of mold ruining your seeds. As a general rule, and it depends on if they're wet when you harvest them, but as a general rule, you want to leave them sit out in a low humidity environment for about 3 days. Some seeds are easy to separate from the chaff, others are not. If you have a seed that doesn't want to come out of its pod or come away from the structure that it's growing on, one way that you can loosen up those seeds is to put them on a screen and then use your gloved hand to rub over that material to break up um, the chaff from the seeds. You don't have to do that before you store them, but it's a good idea because it does help, again, to prevent mold from ruining your seeds during storage. And it also helps to get rid of any insects that might be in there. We don't usually like to get rid of insects, but if there's insects in your seeds, they may well be eating those during storage. And then when you go to get them, there won't be anything there. Another consideration to keep in mind when you're harvesting seeds is try to do it on a dry day or in a low humidity day if possible. That'll help you avoid the issues with mold. The best way to store these seeds, you can put them in plastic, but you want to be sure that they're dry if you're going to store them in plastic containers. I like to store them in paper bags or paper envelopes. I write the name, the dates, and where I collected them on those bags. You do want to store the seeds in the refrigerator. You want to avoid extreme heat or extreme cold that might destroy the embryo in the seeds. So don't leave them in your car on a hot day, and definitely don't store them in the refrigerator. You want to keep them in the refrigerator. Did I say? Yeah, did I say don't store in the refrigerator? I meant don't store in the freezer. Thank you. Another consideration is don't collect them from nature preserves. That's not allowed. And obviously, if you're wanting to collect from someone else's property, you need to get permission. And then a final thing to remember about collecting native seeds is you don't want to deplete the seed bank. If you're collecting a species of seed, as a rule of thumb, you shouldn't take more than 10% of what's available to give those plants a chance to spread on their own. And with that, I'll end here and remind you, if you haven't signed up for our pollinator pathway, if you're growing native plants, please sign up for our pollinator pathway. If you live in McLean, Livingston, Woodford, Caswell, or Prairie County, you can sign up. And then I will turn it over to Sherry, who will talk with us about what to do with those seeds. Yeah.
Okay, you're probably, if you're a vegetable gardener, you're probably wondering why I have a squash plant on there since they're not native. But that squash plant's going to make a point for me. You can take that squash seed and put it in the ground in May, and it's going to grow into a nice squash plant, hopefully. If you put that squash plant into the garden right now, or into the yard, into the soil right now, it'll grow into a plant and it'll get killed this winter. So this plant is from South America. It's allowed to, you can plant it any time down there because the weather's nice and it'll grow. Up here, you can't do that. Our seeds are smarter than that. So in order for our native plant seeds to grow, a lot of them you can't just throw in the ground and they'll grow. They have to go through some kind of what's called a stratification process. There's different kinds of stratification processes, and I'm going to talk about those tonight. So there's dry, cold stratification. Most of our grasses are this. So as Amy said, you just keep them dry, you keep them cold over the winter, and you can plant them and they'll grow. You don't need to do anything more than that. Store them in your garage. Moist cold stratification is most of our flowering plants. So what that means, and we'll get into this in detail, but just you need to keep them moist and cold for a certain amount of time over the winter. Scarification, these are plants, seeds, mainly the legumes, that need to be nicked or they need to have their surface scratched in order for the water to get in for them to germinate. Some of the seeds are so tiny that they need to be surface sowed so that the light can get to them. And some of them actually, and I have killed more plants because I didn't know that they needed to go through 2 cold, warm cycles. I gave them 1 cold, warm cycle and they didn't do anything, so I so the cold, dry stratification. Most of the prairie grasses, some of the forms, like especially the forbs, which are the flowering plants, mostly the mints and the asters. I think I've mentioned all this. As Amy mentioned, protect them from the rodents because they will get into them, protect them from insects, and allow them to dry completely before storing. So those are the easy ones. Now we get into a little bit of the pickier ones. These require a cold period, and that cold period is anywhere from 30, 60, 90, 120 days, depending on which seed it is. And I've got some information in the back for you to tell you which ones are which. But what I do is I put them in I moisten some sand, and I actually have some bags of sand back there for you if you want to try this out yourself. Just moisten it. Do not get it wet, like you can wring it out, but just damp sand. And you just put the seed in there and you put it in the refrigerator for however many days it tells you to do that. You can do this indoors or outdoors, and I think I've jumped ahead of myself here a little bit. If you're going to do it outdoors, you can just put them out in some kind of a container and make sure that water can get in from the top, get out from the bottom. And I've made that mistake too. Forgot to put holes in the bottom of my milk jugs, and I end up with a muddy mess, and it's all frozen. So holes in the top, holes in the bottom of whatever you're going to use. Protect them from squirrels. And then these will just break dormancy naturally. So you just let them go. In the spring, you can open up the lids and just wait until your plants germinate. Now, if you want to have your plants ready for a certain time, like I grow a lot of plants for our plant sale, and I have to have them ready by the 3rd Saturday in March. Doing this method, they're probably not going to be ready and big enough by the 3rd Saturday of March. So, this is the method that I use. I used to use the milk jugs, but I've had better luck with just having a flat with holes in it, and then sowing the stratified seed, or sowing the seeds on the top of that and letting Mother Nature do the stratification. And I have a sample of one of the flats that I use back there, so you can kind of get an idea of what it is. I put a screen over it because if I start this before, well, the squirrels like to bury their nuts in there, so then I end up growing trees along with whatever seeds I have in there. Okay, so the cold, moist stratification indoors, I put, as I mentioned when I jumped ahead, you can use either sand. I like to use sand. You can use vermiculite or perlite. The vermiculite, when you dampen it, just gets all over your hands and sticks to you, and I think it's kind of messy, so I like the sand better. Put it in a baggie, again, label it, and I label it with how long it needs to be stored. So 30 days stratification or whatever, and we'll get into how to figure all this out. Yeah, as Amy said, store it in the fridge, do not put it in the freezer. Scarification, uh, these are a lot of the legume plants, like partridge pea and indigo, that need to have their seeds scratched. And you can either take a knife and just nick off a corner of it so that the moisture can get into the seed, or what I do is I have two little pieces of a 2x4 that were just left over from some of my husband's projects, and I wrap sandpaper around them. I put the seeds between them, and I just scrub the seeds or scrub the sandpaper back and forth real lightly. Again, you just want to scratch the surface. I've gotten a little bit carried away and smashed the whole seed, so be careful with your exuberance. And then that needs to be followed up once you've scratched the surface of the seed so the moisture can get in, then follow up with the cold, moist stratification. Some seeds are so small. I mean, like cardinal flower it's just like dust. But you need to top sow those. So if I'm stratifying them, well, indoors or outdoors, I put them on the surface of the flat that I'm putting them in, and I don't cover them up with soil. Hot water treatment. Um, I haven't tried this one, so this is not from my experience, but just from information that I've read. Is just pour boiling water over the seeds and let them sit, and then you can plant them. But again, I haven't tried this one. Two cold, moist periods. A lot of the woodland plants are like this. Right now, I am going into the second year for my blue cohosh. I ruined several seeds batches a while back because I didn't know I needed to do it twice. But this year was kind of interesting. Actually, the squirrels got into my flat and they started digging it up. And there were my little seeds. And what they do is they put down a root first for the first year. And then once they go through the second cold period, which will be this winter, next year, with any luck, they'll pop up and I'll have a little plant. So a lot of the woodland plants are really picky. I don't know how they ever get any to grow in the woods because they're just, having 2 years of stratification and they need to be carried off by ants and put in their nest and what have you. So luckily they figure it out. Okay, in order to know what you need to do for all the different seeds, Prairie Moon has done all the work for us. And I did contact them, and they sent me what they call their cultural guide. And what it is it has this information in it. So they have each of the seed types or each of the plant types, they tell you how to germinate their seeds. So for instance, if it says A, that means it just needs cold stratification. Oh, just let it go over the winter. It doesn't need anything special. C is the cold moist stratification. So it'll have C and it'll have 30, 60, 90 or whatever days in parentheses. And that will tell you how many days you need to keep it in the refrigerator. So you can request a free catalog, or you can just pick one up and back. I have 50 of them back there, so there should be enough for everybody here, I think, if you're interested. So this is what the catalog looks like, or the documentation they have looks like. So they've got, like the first one here, the tall bellflower, is C30 and a D. So that means you need to do cold moist stratification for 30 days. So in the fridge with your moist sand for 30 days. And then when you go to sow it in the flat, it needs light. So you just sow it on the top of the soil. That's what the D stands for. And all that's explained in the booklet. So if you want your plants to be ready at a certain time, so if I've got one that's a C90, so it needs 90 days in the fridge, I need to start it out 90 days out from when I'm going to plant it. And then I need to know how long I need from planting it until I need it ready for the plant sale. So I'll be starting some things in the fridge 90 days earlier, some 60 days, some 30 days. So that's why I keep all my little packets labeled so I know what I've got. This is, I just have a journal that I keep all this information in. So this is one that I had done a couple years ago. Um, so I keep track of when I put it in the fridge. I also keep track of when they germinate, because from the time you plant it to the time they germinate, I haven't found any information on that. So I've started creating my own notes on that. And then when they're ready for transplant, because I need to transplant them then and get them hardened, which I think I'll talk about a little bit later. So when your seeds are done being stratified, whatever method you've chosen, then you can start them indoors just with a potting mix, which I get mine from AB Hatchery. Thank you, Bill. Label the species with the, label the plants with the, label the flats with the species. And I put a date on there as well. So then I can keep track of when I planted them and when they germinate. And then just keep them at room temperature. When your seeds start to germinate, if you're doing this indoors, which I do for growing the plant sale plants, you need lights. And that's a whole nother presentation. But so when they start to germinate, you need to keep track of them, obviously, and then you turn on the lights. So these are the first seeds. The first leaves to emerge are the seed leaves, and they generally don't look anything like the adult leaves. So when your baby plants now have 4 of their secondary leaves, then they're ready to be transplanted. So the top picture is, one with the 4 leaves on it, and then the bottom picture is I've taken each plant now out of the flat, because I've got a mess of them in the flat, and put them in their own individual pots, getting them ready for the sale. So before I can take them to the sale, I need to harden these plants, and in order to do that, you need to get them outdoors. You need to get them outdoors it takes about 2 weeks, but I put them on the side of the house to begin with, because that's my east side, so they get some morning sun, but they don't get the blazing hot sun. And then I just increase the amount of time that they're out each day. Now, if you've got a ton of flats, like I usually do, my husband has made me this great big piece of plywood, 4x8 piece of plywood with rollers on it, so I can roll it in and out of the garage, depending on the weather. No, you can't have him. So it takes about 2 weeks to harden them. So if you have a certain date you need your plants by, you need to allow that into the equation. And then plant them into the ground. And I think Sherry will be talking more about that. One other thing I'll mention about, I don't know if you're like me, but I tend to buy more plants or grow more plants than I actually get in the ground in a year. So I need to get them through the next winter. So maybe I'll get them in the ground the next spring. If you leave them in the pots above ground, there is a chance that those roots will freeze and it'll kill the plant. So there are several ways that you can go about overwintering your plants. When I had just a few to overwinter, I would just dig a hole in the ground and I would bury the plants in the pots in the ground. And then in the spring, I could just pull the pots out and then hopefully get the another one, you can keep them indoors. I've never tried this just in the garage. I just like to keep them outside, but supposedly you can keep them in the garage. One of the guys from the Rockford chapter told me what he does is he takes a great big tarp, puts all of his pots on it, stuffs it with leaves, and then wraps the whole thing up. And that keeps them warm enough over the winter that it won't freeze the roots. One thing I think I forgot to mention is you should water your plants thoroughly before you start overwintering them. And then my wonderful husband, again, came to the rescue, and he created an in-ground cold frame for me. So he actually dug down about 2 or 3 feet into the ground and built a wooden cold frame in the ground. And that way I can really control the temperature by raising the lid and lowering the lid. If it's in the spring, you know how the weather goes. Sometimes you've got really warm days and it's going to get too hot in that cold frame, so I can open the lid and then I can close it the next day when it's 12. So references, I brought each of these books and I have them on the back table there if you want to take a look at them. The one that I always go to, it's a little bit pricey, but maybe if you're interested, you can find it used, is the one by William Cullinan. He's got information about each of the plants. He has information on how to propagate them, on how and when to collect the seeds, which is really important. And I really like that book. So he's got one on wildflowers, which I brought. He also has one on trees and shrubs, and he has one on vines and I can't remember. He's got 3 of them anyhow, and they're all on growing and propagating plants. So they're excellent resources. The Harry Phillips one is out of print. You might be able to get a used one of that as well. Okay.
I'm a little shorter than everybody else. All right, so although I am technically assigned to do spring, I have to tell you that my project actually spanned many seasons. And so to let you know that I did understand the assignment of being assigned for spring, here are some spring blooming flowers that did come from my garden. So Jacob's Ladder, Giant Marybells, Virginia Bluebells, those are all in my shade garden. And then I had Prairie Smoke in my part shade garden as well. So back to this first slide to tell you what I'm actually going to talk about. So over the past year, I have started to convert my property over to native garden, so essentially a prairie, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So I bought my house in summer of 2020, and this is what it looks like. Typical Midwestern, Central Illinois house, lots of turf, both front and back. So cute little house. And I had expected to little by little whittle away at my lawn and create my native garden. So little areas, little beds around the house I started working on. And this top one is actually a picture I just took of my golden Alexander and wild petunia. So it's past prime at this point, but it looks really nice in spring. And then my bottom one is in the front of my house, and I have a bunch of part shade flowers there. So a couple of areas I started working on shortly after I bought the house, spring of 2021, added a couple more beds to my house, relatively small areas. So pretty nice, expected little by little to continue to do the rest to my yard. Oh, and this is what my yard looks like before I started working on it. So lots of land. And then June of 2021 came along and we got our 100-year floods in McLean County. And that very much changed the trajectory of how quickly I was going to start doing things to the rest of my yard, because my external sump pump blew up into my house during the rains, necessitating that I call the plumbers to figure out why the heck is my sump pump going the wrong direction. Well, it turns out that the 2 previous owners never took care of the sump pump, and the sump pump actually exited in the middle of my yard, and it was buried under about 1.5 feet of soil. So basically what happened is it was blocked, and with the 100-year floods that we had, it all came back into the house. So I didn't know that at first, and how this connects to my talk about native gardens is that I had to have the plumber come out and figure out where the end of the sump pump was in my yard, necessitating my front yard to be dug up. All right, so this, you can see my my laser right here. So that's exactly where the plumber had to kind of dig up and try to figure out where the end of the pipe actually was. So fairly sizable little chunk of my front yard. All right, so fast forward now to the end of July. I have figured out where the end of my sump pump outlet is. My yard has been dug up, and I decided, well, I'm going to forge, full speed ahead to convert my front lawn into a native garden. Knowing that the outlet was in the middle of the yard, I wanted to take advantage of that. So I decided to make a rain garden. And it was quite the process. And if anybody knows anything about making rain gardens, you actually need a lot more space for the exit of the water than you think you do to begin with. So this was my first attempt at taking out space to allow the water to exit and to cycle through the land. It was much too small, so the water basically washed all of the mulch and all of the dirt away from the nice hardscaping that I had. All right, so fast forward to a couple days later, and I have now managed to add the rain garden to a sizable area where the water could cycle through the land appropriately. I have dug up even more of the yard. Lesson number one, digging up your lawn is really, really hard work. And if you're going to do that, you should make sure your lawn is wet because it makes it much easier to dig up all that lawn. So that whole area there, I actually dug up by hand and added mulch to the top. You don't technically need to mulch your land if you're going to add native plants, but I was concerned about weeds and how quickly I was going to be able to fill it in with plants, so I went the mulch route. Fast forward, I finally have some native plants in the area. Obviously, still a lot of work to be done as of August 2021, but here I have I've got some swamp milkweed. I have some spotted joe pye down at the end where I expected it to stay wetter because that's where the water would be kind of cycling through. I think I had some asters and some nodding wild onion, a couple other species that I was able to get my hands on, also from AB Hatchery. And obviously still lots of mulch to be dealt with. And the two big blue tarps, that is all the soil that I actually removed from the yard, and I had to find a place for it. That all ultimately went in my backyard, and it's still in a huge pile in my backyard because I didn't know what else to do with it. All right, so I'll point out that I dug up most of the turf and replaced it with the mulch, but there were some areas that I did not have the energy to actually dig all the turf out. So I used a combination of landscape fabric and any newspaper and cardboard I could get my hands on. I had that as my base layer over the turf, and then I put mulch on top of that. And ultimately, the cardboard and the newspaper deteriorated over the next year. The landscape fabric, I end up removing later on in the year, or next year actually. So I did not keep that there because I ultimately want to keep the health of the soil and I want to be able to plant stuff. So I did remove the landscape fabric. And so it's looking a little better here. You can see I put some hardscaping around it. This is my front yard, so I wanted it to look maybe a little bit more formal than your average prairie garden in someone's front yard. So it's looking a little bit better. I added still a whole lot more of the hardscaping around the actual outlet of the rain garden there. If you walk past it when there's no plants, it kind of looks like a graveyard. So I've taken advantage of that for Halloween and actually decorated it like a graveyard. So this is September of 2021, added some more plants. I actually expanded the mulched area closer to that birch tree, which is basically dead and getting removed this winter. And then in May of this year, I finished up the area that was closest to the house because that area was still mulched and still had some landscape fabric. So I removed all of that. I mulched that, put some more hardscaping, and then put some stepping stones through the garden as well to make it look a little more formal. It's a big enough front yard garden that I wanted to be able to actually access, to be able to walk through it and not have to walk all the way around it. This is what it looks like in June of 2022. So just earlier this year, many more plants got planted, and those that were planted last year are starting to grow up at this point. And this is July of 2022 of this year. So I had some blooms. My swamp milkweed was phenomenal. And I had, I think, 15 monarch caterpillars at one point. I only found 2 chrysalis, so I don't know what happened to the rest of the caterpillars, but they were there at one point. So things are blooming, surprisingly, because a lot of times kind of early second year plants don't really do much, but mine were very happy. And then this was just a couple days ago. So lots more plants have been added since then. So I think I have a little bit of a plant problem. I can't stop buying them. Maybe some of you can relate to that. Some of the species you see here, some cardinal flower on the left. On the left. I've got some New England aster, which is just looking amazing. I have butterfly milkweed, some brown-eyed Susans, and a bunch of other types of plants here as well. And notice you can barely see all the rocks that are surrounding what I call the rain garden. I'll note that I call it a rain garden, but it's not actually a rain garden because the soil is such that the water basically cycles right through the soil immediately. It actually doesn't stay on the surface at all. So it's a rain garden, but it's really more of a rock garden because the rocks really just help the water slow down as it comes out the sump pump. I have, as of this week, I have 60 species in my front yard. And total on my property, because I have many other beds and I'm working on converting my back lawn as well, and it's a much bigger area. I have, I think, 120 native species total between the front and all the other areas. And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight all the different pollinators that I have found. And this is just in the front garden. Of course, I'm on the pollinator pathway. And just in the past year, I have seen so many different species, just in terms of butterflies, but really in terms of wasps and bees and just really interesting critters. And I've had so much fun just like standing in the middle of my garden, staring at my plants, watching the pollinators. I didn't show you a picture of this. Oops, I don't know if you can still, hello? Okay, sorry. The surrounding houses are typical Midwestern houses, so lots of turf. My house really stands out, I think, in all the best ways. I don't know how my neighbors necessarily feel about it, but I can only imagine what they're thinking of me as I'm standing in my garden staring at my plants or squatting down in the middle of the garden watching all the critters do their things in my garden. But it has been an amazing experience, and I hope you enjoyed this.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I had to be the difficult one and bring my own PowerPoint presentation. It took me a second to get it switched over there. So, and mine aren't near as pretty. You guys had all those great slides and backgrounds, and I just do little standard things. But first, I want to thank everybody that's here, especially all the speakers. Everybody has been very supportive of my business these last few years since I purchased it. I know what we do is a great thing for the community and for the pollinators, and of course, we love planting natives and all kinds of plants, but you know, my business wouldn't be there and being as successful as it is without you guys, and especially you know, these great projects. We mentioned the Hudson Library project. I was a big part of getting those plants in, and was happy to deliver them. And I don't know if I'll ever install a tree that big again, though. That was we put in a 400-pound Baldwin burlap tree there. It was beautiful, though, right? It's a great tree. Second of all, I would love to say that that I have a great wealth of knowledge, and I love to share it with people. I won an award earlier this year from the Master Gardeners, the John Merritt Award, for the education that I do, and I don't want to charge for that. I want to do this to help the communities, to help the pollinators, to help our plants out. And so I love it that everybody comes in and asks me questions about plants. And I know more than that. I can tell you about seed germination if you have questions on things. I've got great tips. I was lucky to go to ISU and learn from Don Schmidt, the Dean of Green, who was just a wealth of knowledge. In fact, I just texted him last Sunday about a plant question I had because, of course, I don't know it all. Yeah, it's an important thing that we're doing here, and I love the fact that we're learning about it and that when Amy brought up the way you collect seeds properly, and Sherry was sharing methods of how to germinate those seeds properly, that is great for everybody. And it's going to continue our native programs and get our prairies back to somewhat of what they used to be. And we're lucky that we live in this great state that really supports it, I think. And we have these great native areas that we've brought back to life. So I'm going to talk about some summer natives. I've got some pictures on here, some of my favorite natives, because of course it's hard to talk about all of my favorites in the time frame we've got. But of course we'll have time at the end for questions. So I've got even smaller type than you do. At least I can read the names from here. So Eryngium yuccifolium, this is one of my favorites. A lot of customers, when I worked for Casey's, they wanted globe thistle. This is a great replacement for that. That's a native plant that supports our pollinators, supports our birds in our area. It's a taller plant. It likes that hot, dry sun soil that we tend to have a lot of in this area. It's a good companion plant to a lot of other native plants, so it can be a support for some of the less sturdy plants. And yet it fits well in most gardens because it's white, and it's got this really unique flower, this like thistle-like flower on it that's very sturdy and holds up for multiple months. The bloom time is like 3 to 4 months on it, mainly because that bloom just comes out and it kind of stays there. It's also got a kind of unique silver foliage to it, so it's something that can make it really stand out in a garden where you tend to have lots of greens and other colors. Silver is one that tends to get lost, I think, especially in the native programs. And yeah, it's one that my kid can't knock down. I'll tell you, 7-year-old's not great for gardens. But yeah, she's run this thing over. My dogs have run it over. It takes the abuse and just keeps coming. So rattlesnake master. And that is something I'll point out too. Knowing the scientific names of these plants is very important with what we're trying to do with natives. Because knowing the difference between the yuccifolium and the non-native species is what makes the difference when you come ask me to order a plant. And I don't expect you to be the expert and be able to speak Latin perfectly, and I'll never make fun of anybody. I'm going to mispronounce something here, I guarantee you. But knowing that and having that common ground that we can talk on is going to get us all in the same place a lot quicker. And I will tell you, there's lots of great resources. You've got an awesome library back there. I was looking at some of the books that you can borrow. My nursery I buy from is called Midwest Ground Covers. You can go to their website. It's called midwestgroundcovers.com. Pretty simple. They have a way that you can alter their search engine to only show you their native plants. So you can see the hundreds and hundreds of plants they have to pick from. Also lets you know what I can buy. So if there's something you're interested on there, I can get you those plants. But basically, it can show you these scientific names lined right up with the common names, so you can see the crossover and how we want to talk about this. Because if we start talking about liatris and you don't know the one of 10 species of native liatris we have, it can be really difficult to get the right plant in. So luckily, Eryngium is a very small genus for natives in our area. But yeah, nomenclature, important stuff. So we went from hot and dry to now this is more of your shrub border, your shrubland is what always Don Schmidt called it. This area where the prairie meets your tree line. So these are plants that can tolerate more water. They like some shade to them. This is Actea rasmosa, the snake root. I didn't realize I lined up snake plant and snake root right next to each other, right, or snake master. That wasn't planned. But I love this plant. Again, it's kind of a white one, nice and tall, so it's a great background plant. So mine are against my fence where they tend to not get as much sunlight as my coneflowers and everything else out front. But they have that height to stand up over everything else. They're going to bloom a little bit later in the season too for me. So again, my coneflowers are dwindling down and these are just starting to come up. And they've got a really neat dark foliage. It's almost like a burgundy color if it gets in the right light. But again, can add some unique color even when it's not blooming to your garden. That's part of the reason I'm picking some of these plants is, I'm not just buying this for the bloom. And of course, we're helping the butterflies and stuff with these too. The pollinators love these. But they're giving us multiple seasons of interest. And as I don't remember which one of you brought it up, but when we were talking about, it was Amy, when we were talking about not mulching our leaves, same in our gardens. Don't cut down your flowers in the wintertime and in the fall. Leave those up. Those are pollinator habitats. And honestly, it's something to look at as opposed to just bare ground out in your garden in the wintertime. Not to mention, yeah, the birds that are going to come feed on your snake master and stuff like that. So, all right, this is one everybody should know is lead plant. Not the most common and honestly not the easiest to use in home gardens because it can be a big specimen. Um, the foliage isn't anything too unique. You know, it's got these pinnately compound leaves that kind of resemble like a sensitive plant. The blooms aren't too special, kind of your sage family kind of look of blooms. What we like about this is it's a legume. So legume plants, if you're not or familiar, nitrify soil. So they will actually take nitrogen out of our atmosphere and put it back into the soil, which of course is what all these plants need to feed on. What we need to have break down our leaves in the wintertime. That's that carbon to nitrogen ratio. Um, and so a very important plant for those reasons. Uh, the coolest thing I found about it, it is the deepest rooted native plant we have in this area. So a lot of us are in this situation where we moved into a subdivision that has, what we would call junky soil or what is technically subsoil. The contractors have stripped your topsoil away and have left you with this gray tan clay, basically. And that's what it is it's soil before it's actually gotten the organic matter and broken down enough to become that nice black dirt that we expect to see in the prairie land that we live in. And so if you're in that kind of position, this is a plant you can plant that will tolerate those conditions. It's very adaptable to hot, dry, wet, whatever it needs to be. But that deep root penetration is going to start to break up that subsoil and allow the organic matter to work its way in and actually give you a better soil in the long run. And of course, not something you'll see in the next year or two. It will take, decades sometimes to repair soil like that. And it's going to take more, interference from you of adding your own organic matter, leaves, and other substrates like that. But while it's not the most pretty plant, it's got some great purposes in our gardens, and especially when we're trying to restore some of the native prairies that we've got. This is one I actually got just really turned on to this plant this year. I wasn't super familiar with this poppy mallow, and I had a customer looking for it for a couple years, and I don't know if my grower was having crop issues. We were just struggling to get it. But once we got it in, I ended up taking one of the plants for myself too to plant at home. And what a great little ground cover plant to kind of fill in those gaps around the front of your gardens. Yeah, this is one I'll butcher. I'm going to turn around. Calarejo involucrata, yeah. The purple poppy mallow. Again, I won't beat you up if you don't beat me up. But it's got a really unique color. You don't see this kind of bright fuchsia color in a lot of our natives. It's a creepy kind of ground cover one. I actually planted mine at the edge of the garden timbers that kind of divide beds because my ground really slopes back. And it spills over the edge and gives it this really neat waterfall look. So even when it's not blooming, it's giving you some interest there. And it's got a different kind of leaf. It's just a very deeply lobed palmate leaf. So, I would say the bloom time's relatively short on it. It's a pretty unique plant for the color, but you're not going to enjoy it for probably more than 7 to 10 days. And it is relatively adaptable, although I would say it doesn't like super wet soil. But just one that, like I said, I found interesting just because of the uniqueness of it. We don't see a lot of natives that are actually gonna trail like a vine, like these do, and can spill over walls. And if we could get everybody to replace their creeping phlox with this, I would be so happy. Good. Oh, this is another neat one that I got turned on to this summer. I can't remember the project I ordered this for. It was a really big one. Oh, it was for Tracy Burr at I keep thinking it's Broman because that was the last big project we worked on. But we ordered a ton of these. I think she got like 3 flats. Oh, it was over by the amphitheater, the normal amphitheater. And she planted a bunch of these, this wild senna cassia. Really neat plant. Again, it's another legume like the lead plant. So it nitrifies soil. We're sucking nitrogen out of the atmosphere, feeding the rest of our plants that are in that area. It's got a really neat yellow flower to it. A taller plant. So again, it would be one that you'd want to have as your background. And can tolerate some shade, but really wants to be out in a lot of sun. And I don't know, it's pretty adaptable. And what was the other key thing about this one? Dried flowers. Oh, the parasitic wasps. And a lot of native plants do that. And I think that's something we fail to mention a lot of times when we talk about pollinators is the parasitic wasps in our areas. They are great pollinators because they travel some good distance. but they're parasitic because they will lay their eggs in other bugs that we don't like, Japanese beetle larvae, and actually will kill those bugs off and to produce their own progeny. So really neat thing that they do, and we typically think of wasps as mean bugs that we don't want around. And realistically, wasps can be very aggressive, but in the right position, they're great pollinators and things that we do want to encourage in our habitats, and typically live in the ground, like 70% of the bees, as you pointed out earlier. So something important we need to protect because it is part of our ecosystem and keeps these plants going. And then I had to throw a bush in here because I had a lot of perennials, and that's what we usually talk about. But the button bush, Cephalanthus occidentalis, it's a taller bush, 6 to 8 feet. The blooms are really neat on it, really unique. I wish they would bloom more than like once or twice in my store. I only get 2 or 3 blooms to enjoy, and mine at home is still tiny. But a neat white flower, golf ball sized. My daughter definitely picks them off and throws them at things, so it's fun to watch, right? A neat thing about this, and that doesn't work in my yard because I don't have a huge yard, but I've known some people out of town that this is an excellent waterfowl habitat. Ducks really enjoy nesting in the Cephalanthus. And they'll do other bushes as well, but it's something about the habit of this bush, the way that it kind of rounds down, that really lends itself to waterfowl and ducks. And so if you're one of those that you want some ducks laying eggs in your yard every spring, you've got that little pond like I think a lot of us do, it's a great way to kind of bring them into that area and give them a place to hide. Because again, it's not just about the pollinators and feeding them, we got to protect them too, give them those places to tuck in for the time when they're trying to nest and produce their young. It's adaptable too. This one will actually take a pretty good amount of shade. Mine is actually in a lot of shade. That's part of the reason it's growing so slow, but does really well there, and it tolerates the wet soil by my pond, which is great too. So hopefully it's going to be shade for my pond so the algae's gone in the long run. Then the last one I think I have to talk about, we see a lot of bee balm out there. So this is Monarda punctata, the horse mint. So it doesn't look like a bee balm at all when you look at it in the picture, and it is much shorter version of horse mint or of bee balm. It's about knee high, but the flowers on it are just spectacular. I mean, the blooms on it, and the pictures don't do it justice. They're kind of a creamy white that fades to pink, and they've got specks of lime green in them. Just a really unique pollinator plant that you don't see planted a lot in our area. And hopefully you picked that up from what I was trying to show you here too, is some less commonly known plants. I love to tell people last year was an excellent year. We were still kind of COVID mode, so people were planting and they had established gardens from the first year. And so the pollinator people were just out in force. And I think we sold over 3,000 milkweed plants, if you include all the different species. But we need these other plants out there too. And so I found myself more recently really talking about and bringing up these lesser known species of these plants, and are things that I'm finding out too for the first time. I didn't know about horse mint really until about 2 years ago. And then when it bloomed that first time for me, I can't get enough of this plant. So, and of course a bee balm, so it likes sun and hot, dry weather, a Monarda, like it would. I have also found it's a little bit less likely to get powdery mildew than the standard Monarda punctata, fitulosa. And then this is just my summary, why we're planting plants for the summer. And I think honestly, this ties into what everybody was talking about, is of course we're feeding pollinators. We're trying to, I can't read that, I'm sorry. Trying to give us color in the middle of the summer when it's super hot and dry. And that's the best thing about natives, is they're adapted to our area and will give us those blooms when a lot of these cultivars that we plant are going to peter out and do nothing for us. You're getting your habitat for your birds, you're nitrifying your soil, amending your soil structure. And then of course the joke that I need to make room for fall plants, so come clear them out, right? They're on there. Which I did want to point out, natives are all half price right now at my store. Come on and get some. And really more importantly, if you are not aware, if you're a new member of Wild Ones, you do all get 20% off my native plants at my store. So you just have to point it out to the cashier because they're not going to recognize you, but there's no ID required. Just tell them you're Wild Ones, and they should know to give you 20% off natives. If it's early in the year, give them a break. They're learning. I've usually got new crews then. So that is all I've got.
just for the. Do they just?
Question about cold stratification. You both said don't put seeds in your freezer, but it gets freezing outside, so why not do it in the freezer?
I don't know.
Our freezers are too dry. They don't hold enough humidity. And then they also are too cold. We get freezing temperatures here in this state, but they fluctuate. They will warm up above freezing during the daytime. Seeds typically don't want to be that frozen for that long, or at least not all seeds do. So that's why. Yeah. In fact, when I talk to people about seed storage, I tell them even when you put them in the fridge, closer to the front than the back, because the back can oftentimes be a lot colder.
Thank you all. I have a comment for my question. I just want to put a word in for lead plant because I think it's just an extremely beautiful plant with its soft olive coloring, and it's unique the way it stands out among other natives. But when you were talking about wild senna, you mentioned parasitic wasps, but I didn't catch what the connection is between wild senna and parasitic.
It's just one that they like to nest around. That the bugs that they're trying to parasite with or be symbiotic with. I guess it's not symbiosis, but that they're trying to infect technically. That's where they tend to be around is the senna. I think it's also the color that tends to attract them because they will land on the flowers and pick up pollen and transfer it. I've never personally actually seen the wasps on it. I just know that's something from the literature I've read that is one of their plants they like.
Hey, I'm kind of wondering about the cold stratification. If it says 30 days and you have it in the refrigerator a lot longer than that, does that matter? Or should you stick kind of close to what they're saying for the timeline?
It depends. I have had plants or seeds that I've left in the refrigerator too long and they've germinated in the bag. So you keep an eye on them. If you're going to keep them longer than 30 days, I would definitely keep, or whatever the recommended time is, I'd keep an eye on them. Some of them seem to be fine, but like I said, I've had others germinate in the bag, and I go and look and I've got these yellow little things sticking out from the top of the seeds. So be careful.
On some of the shrubs that you were talking about, a lot of times, we don't have room in our landscapes for shrubs that are that big. How hard can you cut some of them back if you need to kind of keep them shorter? Or how can you keep them shorter?
Absolutely. If you like I said about the button bush in my yard, that it grows very slowly because of the position I put it in. It's on a lot more shade than it would be. And so you can control growth that way by positioning them places where they don't get the proper conditions that will slow them down. When it comes to pruning, and especially native plants can be very aggressive sometimes, especially the shrubbery. You're going to create a headache for yourself trying to prune them to maintain a certain size. And so realistically, while it is possible, I usually discourage people from that. I'm a fan of not pruning shrubs ever. I like shrubs to grow to what they should look like. So even the lilacs in my yard or the hydrangeas, I typically don't prune. I just kind of let them go. And they might be a little wilder, but I'm filling them into the space they're going to be. And so really it is about planning your garden, right? And you always start, especially if you've got a big bare area like you did, start with the bigger stuff because that's going to take the most space, the most time to fill in, and just kind of work around it. And there are some smaller options in the native family, absolutely, too, that we could help you find. So. Yeah. Lead plant's a perennial. So yeah, absolutely. You should be able to cut it back to the ground every year if it doesn't die back on its own. Yeah. You can maintain that in a pretty small spot if you want to. Yeah.
I have a comment. I have 3 lead plants and I do have to protect them from rabbits. So they have, but rabbits only go this, this high. So the one that I've had the oldest, it's growing up above the fence and it's just gorgeous. Also, I bought one of your horse mints last year and I thought it was gone this year. And then the seeds are growing up and it's blooming now and it's gorgeous. Anybody else?
Hardiness zones. We were talking the other day at Master Naturalist that it's in flux right now because of global warming. Has our hardiness zone changed in this area?
I'm going to say yes, it has. And I think we're seeing a consistent shift actually from south to north. Yeah. And if you talk to some conservation biologists who are doing restoration of natural areas, they actually suggest that we plant for the future as opposed to planting for the current. So while we at Wild Ones are all about, planting natives for where the natives should be right now, there's some people who actually say that you should think about what the habitat's going to be like 20 years from now and plant for that, because the plants that we have now might not be able to survive as the temperatures get warmer. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely on what you said. If you're aware, temperature zones are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're 10-degree averages. There are actually A's and B's within those averages that break it down to 5 degrees. 5 years ago, our part of Illinois was moved from zone A, 5A to 5B. So we were moved up 5 degrees warmer in that time frame.
I'll add a little bit to that. It's not just about the temperature, of course, it's about the precipitation as well. And, we've seen extremes, over the past year in terms of the amount of precip that we're getting. We didn't get a lot of rain, at least in normal, not a lot of rain over the past 2 days, but up in Lake County in far northern Illinois, they got 5 inches of rain, and they have been bombarded with rain this year. And that's not normal, so.
Question again about seed starting. What are some, like maybe your top 3 easiest seeds to start for a newbie?
The grasses are easy. Okay. Lance leaf coreopsis. I've found that even though I think it's a C30, you're supposed to do cold moist stratification for 30 days. I've put it in a damp paper towel on a warm windowsill and it'll germinate. Another thing that I tried, and I don't know whether it was, I'd read about it, is you can take milkweed seed and put it in warm water, change the water every day for several days, and it'll germinate. And I just took some old butterfly milkweed seed that had been hanging around in the garage, just in a bag for a couple years, and I was able to get several to germinate that way. So you might try that. Otherwise, anybody else have any suggestions?
Golden Alexander.
Golden Alexander is one that Bill mentioned.
I'd like to pick up on the milkweed. I know we have lots of difficulty germinating milkweed. So say again what you just said about getting milkweed to germinate.
Okay, what I'd read is you put it in a jar, the seed in a jar with warm water, and every day you drain that water off and you added more warm water the next day, and you keep doing that until they start germinating. And in less than a week, I used butterfly milkweed seed. In less than a week, I had ones that were getting a little root coming out the bottom, and then I just put them in a pot. Say that again. Oh, I just leave the water until it cools, and then I change it the next day. So I just changed it every day. No, I just put it in warm water. Yeah. Just, oh yeah, to cover the seeds. Yeah. So I had 3 or 4 inches in there, and there were just maybe a dozen seeds in the bottom. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was surprised at the milkweed seed because I think it recommends 30 days cold moist stratification, and this had just been left in the garage in a bag for winter and summer and winter and summer. Um, but play with it; it's kind of fun.
My question, I got a couple of questions. So when you buy Prairie Moon seeds, have they stratified them and done all the things they're supposed to be doing that you're doing?
No,
Okay. So my second question is, what's the disadvantage or advantage of just taking the seed that you collected in the fall and throwing it on your prepared soil in the winter before it snows, and you don't have to go through any of that stratification, scarification stuff?
that works perfectly well. The reason that I do a lot of that I mess with it is because I want to control when the plant is ready. So if you don't care when the plant germinates and when it grows and flowers, then that works. I mean, when we have a large area, we'll take the seed out and just throw it over, like I said, on the prepared ground over the top of the snow, so you can see where the seed is, and the snow will just percolate it down into the ground. I have no idea. Yeah. I think one of the things you're playing with is rodents and birds can eat the seed. If you're just throwing it out. The other thing is some of it does require scarification. So if your soil doesn't have like sand or grit in it, and it may not get scarified, it may take longer for it to germinate.
These seed mixtures that we're planting, like in November, are we losing some of the species by just flinging it out? They eventually, 2 years later, some of the stuff comes up.
I haven't had personal experience with that, but from other lectures that I've been to, yes, some of it may take longer to germinate that way. Yeah.
Spice bush, I'd like to propagate from cutting. Would fall be the time to do it, or would spring?
Actually, in the dead of winter, you want to go out in January. It's got to be the end of a branch, right? So it's got to have a terminal node on it. You take about 8 inches off. Make sure you have clean pruning shears when you do it. And then you bring it inside and would do usually just a dry soil, a high porosity soil with a humidity dome over it. The reason for that, though, is when plants are in the dead of winter, especially woody plants like that, they've stored up their energy reserves for next year. And so you're going to encourage them to come out of dormancy early and use those reserves to grow roots in the ground as opposed to growing leaves and flowers.
Sherry, if you try that method of growing milkweed seeds after they have germinated, then you have to plant them right away. And how do you can then keep the plant going all winter without a growth?
My wonderful husband has created this cool thing down the basement with shelves and grow lights that move up and down as the plants get taller. And yeah, so you have to put it under the lights then. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's all mine. I have more projects for him.
we've been trying to propagate the musk cluster rose at Sarah's garden. And when he was talking about the spice bush, would that work for a rose bush? With the, you said the dead of the winter.
Yeah.
We haven't tried that, and I'm just wondering.
That would be the appropriate time to do it. Roses are tough to do that with. I would take the cutting in the winter. I might try and soak it in a rooting hormone solution for a couple days before I would put it in a soil mixture, just to try and get it to develop some roots. The problem with roses is the nodes are spaced out, usually pretty far on them, which can that's where your roots will develop, is out of the leaf nodes. So getting enough nodes in that 8-inch chunk that you cut off can be a challenge. Not to mention, by the time you've hit that point in winter, a lot of times you will get terminal node death in your roses, where basically the tip is dead. Not all roses, and I know that's a pretty hardy rose they've got. So that's probably your best way, other than trying to do an air graft with it, or an air root, where you actually root it it's on the rose. Might actually be an easier method for you. So you would do that when the rose is actively growing, cut a couple leaves off, 6 to 8 inches from the end of the plant, and then wrap it in like a moist paper towel that has rooting hormone in it, and then wrap that with like a saran wrap kind of plastic, and could ideally get it to develop roots right there on the rose bush, and then just take the cutting off and plant it later on.
And would you do that in the spring or the summer or the fall?
Realistically, timing wise, you could do it. I would say anytime between April and end of July probably would be safe to do it. You start getting to the end of August and it might not take as well. You might not have enough time to develop the roots you need. So, not to mention when you hit August, September, it's so hot and dry outside, it can be really hard to keep the moisture in there that plant needs to develop the roots. Welcome. Well, she's walking over there. A good seed tip, growing seeds inside, that I tell a lot of people. A small fan in the area where you're growing your plants, and it just needs to be enough to just move the leaves a little bit. But simulating the outdoor wind like that will stimulate meristematic tissue in your plant and will give you stiffer and sturdier plants. Yeah, that's a Dean of Green tip right there.
I didn't realize that New Jersey tea was that hot water treatment, but you can use that hot water treatment on some maple species for the little helicopter, whatever they are.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I have a friend who does Japanese maples, not but that hot water treatment, and then she puts them in moist potting soil, then in her refrigerator, and waits for them to sprout in the bag. And then she pours that into a tray and then puts it under lights. So they're pre-germinated. She knows that they're ready to go. And it's been very successful. And I'm sure you could do it with some native ones. But that hot water treatment expands the seed cavity and really actually like pops it open, scarifies it then, so that water can be absorbed. And that's why it works really pretty well.
I have a growing question for you. How do you decide when you're going to move your seedlings from the trays to the individual cells, and how challenging is that?
Actually, what they recommend is after the plant, your little plant has 4 true leaves on it. So you've got your little seed leaves, you can just ignore those, and you've got 4 true leaves. I've done it then, and I've done it all the way, months later. The only problem with months later is you've got a tangle of roots that you're messing with, but the plants want to grow. So I really haven't had any loss with doing it that way. I just use a plastic fork and kind of dig out the one that I want. I may lose some of the tips of the roots, but just tuck them in there real nice in their new pot and tamp it down, and I've had luck with that.
Okay, we wanted to make one correction. Our plant sale is in May, so it's always the third Saturday in May. So Kathy heard something different, so it is third Saturday in May. I want to thank you for coming tonight, and I want to give another round of applause to our very talented speakers up here. Be sure you do look at the table where Sherry says there is a lot of literature that you may keep and enjoy some refreshments. Is there anything else we need to remind? Okay, all right. We hope to see you next month that Chris Benda is going to be here to talk about the Prairie cemeteries. So that should be an interesting program. So see you then.